Hello Bio 111 students, and welcome to week 2 of the class. And today we're going to talk about some of the chemistry of living things. It's an important part of biology because without knowing the chemistry we don't know a lot of what's going on and why it happens in the body. So first off, we're going to define a few things. Let's define matter. All things are composed of matter. So that includes all liquids, solids, and gases, including the gas that we're walking around in right now, the air that we breathe and the air that we're walking in. And all of matter is composed of elements. An element is the simplest form of a chemical. So let's say oxygen, that's the element oxygen. Carbon, that's the element carbon. And we would find in the periodic table of elements, we find all of the elements found by human beings so far. So when we look at the periodic table of elements, you probably remember it from your high school class, we would see all of the elements known to man so far. So let's quickly look at one of those elements, carbon. So if we were looking at a single atom of carbon, which is the smallest amount we could possibly have of carbon, is one single atom, and we looked at it on the periodic table of elements, we would, first of all, it's a simple single thing is considered an element. Just wanted to put that in there before I forgot. And we would see the numbers 6 and 12 written on the periodic table, and the number 6 denotes the atomic number of the element carbon. The number 12 denotes the atomic weight of carbon. All of the mass of any atom is in the nucleus, and so what we have in the nucleus is 6 charged particles that give it the number 6. They are positively charged, and each one is called a proton. So we have 6 protons worth of charge, and each proton weighs 1 atomic mass unit, as does a neutron. And a neutron is the other thing that's in here that makes up 12. So there are also 12 minus 6 neutrons. So that's 6 neutrons. So in the atom carbon we have 6 neutrons, 6 protons, and that gives us a total mass of 12. Now, we have a charge of positive 6, and to balance that out, we have to have 6 negatively charged particles on the outer rings. These are called electrons. So the first ring generally has 2, and the next ring will have the rest of the electrons for carbon. So you'll notice there that the outer ring has 4. This is called the valence ring. In the valence ring, it's the area that's able to share with other electron or with other atoms that this atom comes in contact with, and so it has 4 available spaces because it only has 4 electrons on the outer ring, and it wants to get to 8. And generally, that's when atoms are most stable, when they get to 8. So often you'll see an element CO2, which has come up in the news a lot, and that is carbon dioxide, and it has 2 oxygens attached to one single carbon. So we'll have an oxygen here and an oxygen here, and they're attached to the carbon. And each of the oxygens has 6 electrons in its outer shells, so it would like to have these 2 and these 2, and that's how it basically attaches in a bond. Now we're going to talk about bonds. So there are 2 types of bonds. There are ionic bonds and there are covalent bonds. Ionic bonds are when an electron is given by one element to another. So we have sodium here, and we have chloride here, and sodium is an anion. It has a charge that is positive, whereas chlorine is an anion. It has a charge that is negative. So what happens is the sodium receives an electron from the chlorine, into its outer shell, and they're bonded. That is called an ionic bond. The other type of bond is a covalent bond. Remember we talked about this outer shell being a valence shell? Well, what happens with a covalent bond is that, we'll use the example of water, which we'll get to in a second, about how important water is for life on our planet. Oxygen, its outer shell, has 6 electrons. So it really wants to get to 8 in its outer shell, and so it needs something that has the other 2, and something that could fit the bill and get the job done are 2 hydrogen atoms. So we'll see the 2 hydrogens come in like this. And their outer shell, with its single electron in it, satisfies the number 8 wanted by oxygen. And so you've got a good bond there, covalent bond. Now, something to note about covalent bonds. There are charged covalent bonds, which ends up with, even though there's a bond there, there's a slight charge, and that is called a polar covalent bond. And in water, we end up with a very polar substance. The oxygen stays slightly negative, and the hydrogens both stay slightly positive. So what ends up happening is water sticks together, and that cohesive property of water is one of the reasons why water is very very useful solvent in our in terms of biology, because its polarity allows it to dissolve a huge number of different chemicals and different elements, and a lot of those are transported in water, in bloodstream of various animals, and in the circulation of plants also. So a lot of the different minerals, a lot of the different food types, a lot of like glucose and stuff like that, salts like sodium chloride, a lot of those things end up being transported in water. Our blood is almost all water with cells floating around in it. Also, its polarity means that water sticks to the sides of tubes and is easily transported up the sides. So, for instance, if you were to get a glass of water, one of the things you'll notice about it is the meniscus sticks to the side of the glass. Unlike other liquids, where it will tend to do either this or this. Water, the meniscus sticks to the side of the glass, and that is another property that shows what happens within tubes, like tube networks, like our arteries, our veins, like the xylem and phloem in plants. So another thing I want to cover really quick is isotopes. So we have our carbon here, and if the atomic mass was different, that would be called an isotope of carbon. So the atomic number is the same and it's the same element, but the atomic mass is different. That's called an isotope. So isotopes are generally more unstable. You'll hear isotopes used commonly when they're talking about radioactive isotopes, and they're extremely unstable, and the atomic number is the same, but the atomic mass is different. This area here is known as the electron shell. It's where the electrons live. This is called the nucleus. It's where the neutrons and the protons are. When an atom loses an electron, it becomes more positive because electrons are negatively charged, and an atom that has lost an electron is called a cation. And so that's I guess if you like cats, you could see them as being positive, and that would be a way to remember it. One that has gained an electron becomes more negative, and that is known as an anion. The fact that the letter N is in anion twice might help you to remember that it's more negative. Because N for negative, I guess. So, let's draw a few of these atoms, and that way you guys will get some idea of what they generally look like when you're asked to draw atoms. So, first off, let's draw carbon. Oh, we have that right here. So, C6H12. So you have 6 protons, 6 neutrons, and 6 electrons, 2 on the inside. Oxygen. we have 8 and 16. So that tells us that the atomic number is 8. So we're going to have 8 protons. 16 minus 8, we're going to have 8 neutrons. And we are going to have, to balance out the protons, we're going to have 2 and 6. So and that gives us a total of 8 electrons also. Hydrogen. Hydrogen is actually 1 proton. So you have, it's very simple to draw. You have 1 outer ring, 1 electron. And it has 1 proton. Nitrogen, you'll find it at position 7 on the periodic table, and that has atomic mass of 14 and a charge of 7. So that tells us that 14 minus 7 gives us 7 neutrons, and we know from the atomic number that it's 7 protons. So it also has 7 electrons. And the next ring will have 5. And it wants to get to 7, so you can see why it would also like to bond to a couple of oxygens, and that way it would be able to make up the 8 in either oxygen. And it would also have 8. So these carbon, oxygen, hydrogen and nitrogen are important because they are basically the elements of all living things. We talked about covalent bonds, polar and non-polar. Hydrogen bonds are part of the story of water. They're because of the fact that water has the slightly negative oxygen and the slightly positive hydrogens, they want to bond with each other. So every molecule, this is one single molecule of water. You'll see 1 hydrogen on one side, an oxygen in the center, and 1 hydrogen on the other side. I'm drawing this angle because this is a more correct representation, but you might see it as HOH, which is also somewhat correct. That is a water molecule. But each water molecule, because of this, wants to bond to other water molecules, and that gives it that sticky quality that I was talking about earlier. And those are called hydrogen bonds. And hydrogen bonds are, again, the reason why water is one of the things we look for on any planet we are exploring. We're looking for available water, because available water tells us whether or not life would be likely to work on that planet, because it tells us that this polar solvent, water, is available to help make it work. Another force I want to talk to you about is van der Waals forces. Hydrogen bonds. Van der Waals forces, as you can see by the way it's spelt, named after a Dutch guy called Van der Waal. And what he discovered was that when you drop a little bit of dye into a cup of water, or have some sort of a smell in a room, that there are forces dispersing let's say, a slight smell of gas in a room, someone left a Bunsen burner on for a second, that within a few minutes you'll be able to smell that at the other end of the room. And the reason for that is because there are forces in the gas pushing, forces in the air molecules pushing that gas outwards. It's called a dispersal force. And you'll also see it if you drop a little bit of dye into a cup of water, and you'll see it disperse the dye throughout the water until it's evenly colored throughout. And those are called van der Waals forces. They're much weaker than hydrogen bonds, but we still want you to know about them. Let me make sure that I've got everything covered here. Okay, the valence shell is that outer shell, and it's the part that's ready to share. And a sharing bond is a covalent bond. So valence and valent, you get the idea behind those. We talked about ionic bonds. That's where an electron is donated by one atom to another. We use the example of sodium chloride. There will be a knowledge check at the end of this week on Thursday, and there will be a critical thinking at the end of this week, both due at the end of this week. But I feel confident that you'll be able to tackle them. And if you have any questions, I have absolutely no problem with you guys. Any question you have, just send me an email or send me a message through the Canvas, and no problem. I'll get back to you. Thank you.